Hey guys, how you doing out there? This is Rom Vacio with a quick tutorial. Over the last couple of videos I've been performing live. This time we're going to focus a little bit on sound design. Alright, before we get into it, please do me a favor and like, subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified when I post videos. It helps me out a lot and it also makes the YouTube algorithm happy. Alright, so today we're going to be covering a little bit about sound design. Now, why would you want to create your own sounds? Well, it's pretty simple. If you use the sounds that everybody else is using and what comes in your synthesizers already, it's really not going to make you sound any different. And in this industry that is so jam-packed with producers and musicians and all sorts of people trying to get noticed, you really want to have a sound that is very unique and that is you. But of course we know that this can take a long time, figuring out how a sound is going to work within your mix, as well as how to hear it and what you should be listening for is a little bit complex. So today we're not going to get, of course, to cover everything because it's a pretty long, complicated subject, but we are going to get a little bit into what I do to create sounds. So I create every sound custom for every song. So I normally start with a drum and a bass and go from there. In this particular case, we're going to make a sound that is a little bit more expansive. It's going to cover more of the sound spectrum than I normally would. But even so, you're going to notice that there's a pretty big separation between the low end of the sound and the high end of the sound. And the reason we do that is so that we can create two different frequencies when we're doing it into the mix, so we can fit it into two different parts of the pocket. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Now, you can build this directly in the synth, but it is a little bit difficult because you have a smaller screen and you have to navigate through all the different menus, and it's kind of a pain. So instead, I use the tone manager from Roland. In this particular case, we're going to be making a sound for the JUNO-DS by Roland. So the tone manager you can download from their website, and I'll link it below. Of course, if you're using a different synth, most synthesizers that have an option for any kind of library or an editor will have it on the manufacturer's website. So most of the time you can do that. Of course, if your synth is purely analog, that may not be the case. Or if you have a synth that is older and doesn't have USB control, you may be able to still do some stuff directly through MIDI. But you may not have the option. This is specifically for synths that do have a tone editor of some form through the manufacturer. So we'll go ahead and get into it. So the first thing I've got to do in this particular case is I set up, Reason, which is my primary DAW, and I set up a control here through MIDI. That way I can use the keyboard on my desk. And the reason for that is obviously I don't want to have to be running back and forth every time I modify the sound to check it. You can use, in this particular tone editor, you can use the keyboard right here, but it has a little bit of delay and it's kind of a pain. I prefer to, as a pianist, I prefer to have a tactile feel of the keyboard in my fingers. So when I'm designing, I just like to be able to go back and forth. So using Reason allows me to do that here. Super handy. So after that, you pretty much set and forget it. So you don't really have to do anything. You can do this with your own DAW, however you want to do. So let's go ahead and get into the design. All right, so we have, as you see here, an initial patch that is already initialized, and there's nothing assigned to it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and start assigning some things so we can create some sounds. So first thing we're going to do is assign a category here. And pretty much everything else is going to be roughly the same. We're going to go ahead and set that. And we do want this to be polyphonic sound. If you're not familiar at all with synthesis, it just means that you can hit multiple notes simultaneously and they will all sound. Instead of monophonic, which will only hit one note at a time. All right. So for now, we are done in this section. So as you can see here, we've set it as a keyboard. We know the volume is 127, which is the maximum volume that you can do in this particular case. Our analog feel, it's going to add a little bit of warmth, it's going to modulate the sound a little bit. And so we want that just a little bit above the middle for the sound that we're going for. We're going to build a little bit of a pad with a saw kind of effect in the background of it. This is not a sound that I've used in the past. This is a completely new sound. I'll go ahead and post this online, and you guys can download it as well, so you can use it as a sample anyway. All right, moving right along here. So in the next section, we're going to go here to the wave sounds, and this is all the different samples that are in this sound. So the sound in this particular synthesizer, the sounds are made up of parts. You can do up to 4 different tones, and that's going to make up the entirety of your sound. In this particular case, we're going to start here in the first wave group, and we're going to go ahead and send that over to Vintage Epic. Let's go ahead and check this out. All right. EP is there. I'm sorry, it's EPFC, not Epic. So, and let's see here. This is actually the stage version. We want to go vintage, so we get a very specific sound here. Give me one sec. No, let's see here. Sorry, there's a lot of patches here, so a lot of tones. So we kind of have to go through them and let's see here. Okay, I believe that is 105. There we go. 105. There we go. This is the next one. We're going to go ahead and change that initial wave group to expressions, keys, and we're going to set this one to tone number 47. Now, of course, this is, I've already run through this sound, and even though I haven't used it, I kind of messed around with it a little bit so that I could quickly go through this tutorial. But the fun of this, at least for me, is kind of messing around with it and feeling out the sounds and going through all the different tones and putting everything together. So the next one here that we're going to do is we're going to leave the wave group the same, and we're going to change it to 459. Scroll down real fast here. All right, this is going to be JV strings. And if you're familiar with some of the JV synths, for example, one of the synths that I have is JV 1010. There's a lot of strings on there, a lot of different pad sounds, stuff like that. So this particular set has a lot of retro sounds, and that's kind of what we're going for in this particular pad. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and change this last one here to expression keys. Oops, wrong one. Expression keys here, and we're going to go to 409. Now you see me looking over here, and that's because I did take snapshots of each one of these so we could quickly go through them without taking up too much time. Right. And now if you're using a different synth, your process may be just a little bit different, but the idea is the same here. When you're using synths, you're basically either adding or taking away, or you are modulating, or you're changing the signal by filtering it. You're changing it with CV. There's different things that you're doing to it, but it's always just changing this, changing small little parts of each sound that make up the entirety of the sound. In this particular case, we're adding different tones to begin with, and then as you can see here on the left, there are right here, you can see that there's quite a few different options. The Juno synths, and in fact a lot of the Roland synths, give you so many options that you could really just spend days creating a single sound. But obviously we don't have that kind of time, so we're just gonna keep going through here. And the next one here, so we're gonna set the right wave, and that's going to be number 5. Go, let's see here. All right, and then the second one here is going to be number 24, suitcase. Let's see. Number 199. Of course, these numbers are going to be completely different for your synth. If you're, they may not apply to your synth specifically, but again, it's just the idea. You're basically putting things together and taking things apart. So we're actually going to leave this last one blank here, and we're going to go ahead and turn all of these tones on so the synth has access to it. Now, my synth is already hooked up here through USB, going through my MX1 Roland mixer, so that every time I do any change here, it automatically gets sent over to the JUNO-DS and gets updated. So if I play the sounds, we'll be able to see here in just a couple minutes once we get there. So we want to go ahead and change some of the delay times, just to give it a little bit of movement and make the sound not so boring, right? So let's go ahead, and the first one we're going to set to 4. And the second one we'll go ahead and set to 9. This is just a little tiny bit of delay that changes it a little bit when it starts. So by doing this, it's going to allow us to have just a little bit of separation between the sounds, which makes things a little bit easier to mix. And it's also going to give us a little bit more of a rich sound instead of just having everything starting at the same time and being kind of boring. So we'll go ahead and set this one here to, let's grab this, 34. And the last one we're not going to do anything to. Now, we also want to add a little bit of color here. So we're going to leave that one at 1. We're going to change this one to 3 here. This one to 4. And 3. Now, of course, I've already messed around with this. In fact, I spent quite a long time just playing with the sounds and figuring out exactly what I want to color and how I want to color it. Of course, yeah, you do get familiar with the synth, but unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on how you look at it, there's just so many variables and so many different things that you can do that you really never really fully know how each change is going to make the sound react. So, for me, that's of course part of the fun. But if you're just trying to rush through this, is probably something you might want to start with a preset sound, just because getting a sound right when you're just designing it is pretty difficult, and it takes a bit of time and just practice, and your ears have to get used to hearing what it is that you want and how it's going to fit into the pocket that you're trying to fit it in. So when I write music and when I mix everything down, I write each sound based on the sounds that I've already written. So I normally start with a drum, and then I will go into the bass. And I like to have those there because it's not only in my rhythm line, but it's also the frequencies that I really don't want to mess with. They're the ones that I need to have super clear. Of course, everything should be clear in the mix, but those are the frequencies that if I screw up on, everything is going to be super muddy. So I know that whatever sound I create after that is going to be based around the frequencies that I'm going to be cutting or have already cut in those particular sounds. I generally use a series of cuts because I already know what my kicks are going to sound like for the most part. Because I play synthwave, they generally have a pretty similar sound. Obviously, they're not. I use different kicks and different snares and stuff like that for each track, but there is, of course, the plated reverb and the way that they're compressed to give it that retro sound makes it a little bit similar. So I can use a lot of templates that I've built for EQ, and this allows me to also make this a little bit easier. Now, if you don't have that ability because you are creating something different every single time, let's say that you just have a pretty wide genre, or you're playing just dance music or something like that, you're not so pegged into a specific genre and a specific sound, so you may have a little bit more flexibility. If that's the case, then you're not going to you may not have the ability to mix this with a template, so you'll need to pay a little bit more attention to the sounds and your low end, your high end. All right. So we've got that set, and we've got the depth set as well for these. Let's move on here to the next step. Now, the next step is we're going to add a little bit of effects here. So if we hear it now, it sounds interesting, but it's kind of flat. There's really nothing there, right? It's just a basic sound. There's a little bit of movement, but that's about it. All right. So the next thing we're going to do here, move to the effects here. As you can see, it's an empty, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to set this to number 53. I really do like the delays here. This is going to be a 3 delay. Let's see here. No, that's 52 here. This is an analog delay, and if you remember, we did the analog sound a little bit at the beginning. We put it about 65 to try to give it a little bit more of that old feel, a little retro feel. So with this delay, we are opening it up a little bit more. We're not giving it the polished and the tightness that you might have heard in other reverbs and delays, specifically more digital ones. So this also adds to our analog sound. So we're going to go ahead and leave this the same, and we're going to leave most of these the same here. What we are going to do is we're going to change our control. Right? So we want to be able to modify how this is going to change. And so in this particular case, we are going to use a system control because I want the controls on my keyboard to be able to change the way that this reverb works and this delay works. So let's see here. We're going to put it on feedback. That's going to give us a little bit of a change. So if you remember, it was sounded pretty dry and pretty dull. So here it is with the effect. Now that's just the effect, and now if I go ahead and modulate, so here's open, here's closed. So while the tail is pretty much the same, there's a little bit, it's just a little bit wider when I have it open. So now, of course, we can set this to just about anything. So let's say that we wanted to set this to aftertouch, and if your keyboard has aftertouch, or if you're using a controller and it has aftertouch, then it's going to make some difference. So depending on how your keyboard is, it's going to affect how you can modulate the sound, how you can change it. So in my case, I like using that. So we'll go ahead and be finished there, and for now that's pretty much it. So of course we can also add, you know, some chorus and stuff like that if you want. Personally, I haven't added any chorus on this, but you know, let's go ahead and mess around with it and just kind of see where we're at. Right? So let's add a filter. Let's add a low pass filter here, and we're going to reverse it, and our reverb type is going to be, let's do room here. Let's not change anything here yet, and let's just see what it sounds like. All right, what if we change the pre-delay a little bit? Let's change this up. You can see, all right, now it's starting to add a little bit of a change here. So now it's starting to sound a little bit fuller, and that's exactly what we want. Now, as you can see here, we can actually change some of the frequencies. We can reduce some of the low end. I actually like where it's at right now, so we're not going to do that. But this is, again, part of the fun is just figuring out where you're at and what you want to do with the sound. So for me, this is actually pretty good. I really like this sound the way it is. It has a modern feel, but it's still a little bit retro, and something that I could definitely use. Of course, depending on what other sounds go with it, I would maybe roll off to the high end, a little bit more off the low end. It just depends. I like to create really, really narrow bands for each sound, so I don't have to fight with the different sounds. So let's see here. You can also, of course, change the level, and let's mess around with them. Well, I added quite a bit there. Well, I made it a lot richer, a little bit muddy, but if we roll off the low end, not too bad at all. Now, of course, if you are, this is more of a pad lead, but if you are doing a bass line, for example, you might want to go back up to and where we have created it polyphonic and make it monophonic. And the reason for that is that really when you're doing a bass line, a lot of times you don't need more than one note at a time, especially if you're doing dance music. So if we were to change this here, I can press as many different notes as I want, and it's only going to sound one. But it's great for bass lines. Because then you don't have a lot of mud going on. So, obviously in this case, I'm going to change it over to poly. Of course, the other time that having it on mono is good is also in leads. All right. So I think we're pretty much there here. Let's go ahead and set this back again to poly. And then you'll want to go ahead and save it. And that's pretty much it. You've created a sound, right? So you can do this again with pretty much any synthesizer. If you don't have an application that you can do this with and you have to do it on the synth, that's okay too. Just follow the same process, the same idea anyway. You're just taking the different parts of the synth and putting them all together to make a different sound. You're filtering, you're changing frequency types, and so the different kinds of filters, and that's going to make your sound. Obviously, if you have a monophonic synthesizer that doesn't have a lot of controls, a lot of effects, then you'll need to add some outboard gear. Now, I know that some people really don't like using the effects that are on the synthesizers. For me, I particularly like the ones on the DS. I also have the different expansions that you can get from Roland. But even with those, I use those and modify from there. But I do feel that Roland has really stepped up and really has some amazing stuff going on right now. So, if you're into Roland, this is great for you because they have tone managers for pretty much every modern synth. If you use other synths, that's awesome too. But you may have to do a little bit more research as to what tone manager you have, if there is one at all. And if not, again, just you can use the synth directly. I love that as well. It's very tactile, especially if you have the luxury of a bunch of knobs. Unfortunately, the DS doesn't have a ton of knobs, so it's not great for that. All right. I hope you enjoyed the sound. Like I said, I'll go ahead and upload it and link it down below so you can download it as a sample. Of course, I've already got a save, so I'm not going to go ahead and save this, but you'll want to go ahead and save that. And in order to save that, you just want to click write and it'll write it. You can change the name here. Obviously, you'll want to do that so you know which patch it is. But that's pretty much it. Again, please go ahead and like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you'll get notified when I upload any new videos. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me down below in the comments. And that's pretty much it. All right, see you next time.